I think the real power is in the psychological
Mm-hmm.
and emotional benefits and healing that goes on, and discovering you are not alone.
For those living with SADS conditions and other inherited heart diseases, the emotional weight can be just as challenging as the physical realities. Learning how to process fear, uncertainty, and loss is an important part of living with these conditions. In this episode of Let's Talk SADS Live, we explore how storytelling and expressive writing can help people navigate illness, trauma, and difficult life experiences. Our guest, Dr. Sharon Bray, is an educator and author who has spent over 25 years helping people tell their stories of illness, loss, and healing through writing. Today, she continues this work through Writing the Heart, an expressive writing series for heart failure patients at the Ted Rogers Centre for Heart Research in Toronto. In this conversation, Dr. Bray reminds us that sometimes the path through fear and uncertainty begins with something simple but powerful: telling our story. Hi, Sharon, and welcome to Let's Talk SADS Live. You and I have known each other through the cardiac community for many years now, and I'm so pleased that you could join us. You kind of have a unique entry point into this cardiac world. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your own patient story, and then I'd like to get into what your expertise is in expressive writing.
Great. Well, I'm happy to be here, and my story is probably not uncommon to anyone who lives with heart conditions. But a day in December, sunny, beautiful California, walking my dog around the block. I said hello to the postman, walked a few steps uphill, and that's the last thing I remember. I woke up, I don't know for how long I was out. Totally out. There was no one on the street in the neighborhood. No one saw me go down. My dog was still waiting patiently by my side. So I thought, how strange. And I went home and I had a meeting to prepare for, and then I realized I was bleeding from the chin. And so I called my husband and said, I should just let you know, he was out teaching, that this happened. Strange thing. I've got a meeting at 1:00. I need to get going. He said, you're not going anywhere. Sit down. No, I'm fine. And I collapsed again, and I was out again. And the next thing that woke me up was the telephone, and it was the emergency person saying, the EMTs are on their way. And I said, I'm perfectly fine. She said, are you sitting down? And I said, no. And she said, sit down. And she said, are the doors unlocked? I said, I think so. She said, make sure they're unlocked. She said, they'll be there in 2 minutes. So I sat down and I realized I really wasn't feeling well, but I had no idea what awaited me. So, of course, 2 trucks, not one, pulled up with 6 drop-dead, gorgeous young men who came hustling in, ripped my shirt open, examining me, and I'm trying to make jokes. It wasn't until they got me in the ambulance to go to hospital that I realized actually I'm not well. I was put under observation for 3 days and then told, my family doctor came in and said, we think you've had a heart attack. And I went hysterical. I burst into tears. I said, I can't die yet. I have my first grandchild's ready to be born. She said, you're not going to die. She said, the cardiologist is coming in. He came in and reiterated that I wasn't going to die, at least not yet, and that what I had was heart failure. And that was my introduction. It was a whirlwind experience. I had a defibrillator put in immediately after I'd come out of surgery for an angiogram. I didn't know what a defibrillator did. I mean, I was ignorant and panicked. And I never really understood, to be honest, the totality of heart failure until I came back to Toronto. My conversations with my cardiologist in California were pleasant. He told a few jokes, I told a few jokes, and he checked my blood pressure, and away I went. I was lucky enough to get Heather Ross as my doctor. And now I began to learn about it and understand it. And I really felt confident that I was being cared for in a way that was necessary. And so that was my introduction. And it certainly has changed my life in multiple ways, but I'll let you decide which question you want to ask about just how has it changed your life.
Well, if our listeners didn't pick up on it, I certainly did. That is a story well told. I mean, you have obviously added some, I can see it in my mind, that experience that you had. I mean, it elicited a very emotional response for me to, even the detail of your dog sitting beside you, and then the hot guys coming to save you.
Yeah.
And that really is your area of expertise, is helping people. I think, if I could express it, helping people tell their stories and making meaning of what happened to them.
Yeah.
What meaning can you bring out? What does it mean to you to tell that story? And how has it helped you?
Well, it opened me up. What can I say? I started working with patients, but cancer patients, several years before. I'd been diagnosed with early stage breast cancer. And I'd also been working with a lovely mentor in creative writing. And her approach to creative writing was so simpatico with my own background, teaching and psychology and so on. It wasn't about form. It wasn't about the elements of writing craft as much as it was about creating a safe place for people to write openly without fear of critique and do it the right way, do it the wrong way, whatever, to tell their story and be supported by that. And I took to it like a bee to honey. And so when it happened, when I became again a patient, this time I was more frightened for myself, to be honest. I didn't understand what heart failure was. It was the heart. Cancer, I had a little bit of surgery. I was done. This was different. And I think it totally affected my perception about who I was as a healthy, functioning human being. What was my natural thing to do? To do what I always did, to write and tell my story. And I wrote a couple of books about the process and bits of my story. And then when I came here and started seeing Heather, she became aware of what I was doing with cancer patients. I carried that work on. And next thing I know, it's 2000, it's the COVID epidemic. We're heading into 2001, and she's gotten me in touch with Ann Simar at the Heart Hub and said, we got to do this. And that was the beginning. So I began leading these same groups for cardiac patients, predominantly heart failure, but a real mix. And essentially gave them a space to tell their stories without, it's not about critique. It's not a academic creative writing class, but it's a way to encourage people to tell their stories and be affirmed in those stories. At the same time, the way I work is people do learn about what telling a story is about, bits of craft. They learn from each other. It doesn't matter the form. It can be essay, fantasy, poetry. It doesn't matter. What matters is that people write. And I was very influenced by the work of a psychologist named James Pennebaker, who did 30 plus and more years of research with his colleagues on how writing can be healing. And that was my spark to do this and carry my love of story and literature and writing into a domain that also excited me And then I felt I was, because I'd been an educator and had a background in psychology, it all came together for me. So that's kind of a long-winded explanation of how I got there.
Well, so you are very clear that this is expressive writing. It's not memoirs. What is it and what is it not? Maybe let's define it.
Maybe a better terminology that makes it more understandable is therapeutic writing. But the parameters of this, it's timed. So 10 minutes at most. I give people 20 minutes. That's a long writing exercise. All the writing is done in response to a prompt. So, for example, a prompt that I might give any patient is to begin at the beginning. Write about the day you discovered you had a faulty heart. Write about the day that you discovered you had cancer. Write about that moment. What was it like? And just plunge right into the shock and the fear and all of it. And that gets everybody writing quickly. The writing is timed. It's timed for a reason. You want people to write quickly without going back and correcting and changing and turning it into good writing. The most powerful writing I've ever heard comes out of these groups because it's coming from the raw, emotional, real experience of a life-threatening condition. And I am humbled by the writing that comes up. I am absolutely humbled, but this tremendous sense of community develops. I give people the option to read out loud. They don't have to. They can be with me for all of the 6 or 8 weeks and never read out loud. That probably has never happened. Invariably, there will be that first timid step. And then we give feedback. But the only feedback I allow is what in the writing was strong, what moved you, what was powerful. That's it. There's no critique per se you could have done or have you thought about doing X. It's just simply you accept what has been given, you honor it. And for me, it's, at the risk of sounding a little missionary-like, it's sacred work. It's the human spirit being expressed on paper. Mm. And what happens over the course of the time together, several things. One is people get so much more expressive about their writing. 2 is they become more honest. They become less fearful of going deeply. And 3 is this wonderful sense of community develops around shared story. Mm. And that's called civilization. That's how we came together, sharing our stories and creating our stories to make sense of what was happening to us. And that's essentially what happens in these groups. It's sense making. But there's no judgment. And the reason there's no critique is because if you start critiquing immediately, you're making a judgment about the honest experience that's been expressed. And that's not the point. The point is to write freely. I've had people go on and publish, but that's up to them. But I have stories, I have poetry that people have written in the groups that astound me. Beautiful, beautiful. And if you just give people the space and a nudge and the freedom to write whatever comes up, wonderful things happen.
Yeah. Well, it's very primal, isn't it? It's what we've done for thousands of years is collect and sit by a fire and tell stories. What do we now know about the tangible benefits of doing this therapeutic writing?
Oh gosh, I don't have Pennebaker's research in front of me, but the healing shows up, and he studied different populations. I will say that cardiac patients were least studied. There's only a few research. A lot of studies with cancer patients, Vietnam vets, a variety of health conditions, arthritis, and so on, that have had real impact on people's lives.
Yeah.
A colleague of mine did work with the Vietnam vets because her son had come back from Vietnam severely traumatized. And when those men wrote and read aloud, I was there to hear some of their writing on several occasions. You couldn't walk away from it. It was so powerful and so human and so expressive. And it gave you a real sense of what that trauma was about. The same thing happens when people start to express what having cancer or heart failure or any other terminal situation. I've also worked with organ transplant people to really be able to articulate the fear, the terror, the questions, all of those things that make up that experience, but also to come to terms with it.
Yeah.
And that's part of it too. And I've had some beautiful writing from people who knew they were dying and did while the group was ongoing. But again, to hear someone you've been sharing stories with dive into that experience of death and knowing one's life was terminal sooner than later, it does remarkable things to the sense of community and understanding. So I've veered off the concrete results of how writing is healing. I think the biggest one is probably like therapy, you get it out.
Yeah.
And if you get it out, you can examine it and see what's rational, what's irrational, and so on. I think that's a very big part of it, but it has physiological benefits for different populations. What it does for heart patients, for example, is it helps lower the heart rate, its positive effects on the blood pressure, those sorts of things. So there are physiological benefits in all health groups that he looked at. But I think the real power is in the psychological and emotional benefits and healing that goes on, and discovering you are not alone in what you feel and what you've experienced is huge. It's the power of community.
Yeah.
And that is part of it too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Knowing you're not alone is, because it can feel quite lonely.
Very.
When you have these conditions. I did do some reading, in preparation to talk with you. And some of the things that I unearthed in my reading was enhanced immune system functioning.
Yep. That's
reduced symptoms and severity of disease. Higher levels of agency and feeling empowered, and a greater desire to change behavior and being more emotionally engaged.
Yes, all of those things happen.
Yeah, and I would have to imagine as well with the hopefulness and feeling gratitude of what you can do.
Yes.
Or even if you can't change your circumstances, at least enhancing the quality of the time you have.
And I think part of what the writing does, and it's so important because living with a potentially terminal condition sooner than rather that you didn't plan have life be shortened by. I think that the simple fact that you're in a community that shares that experience in varying degrees, understands, and honors your experience. I think that sense of belonging and being with people who also have experienced this is extremely powerful and beneficial.
Yeah. So we touched on, the beginning, your story. For some people, would going into their trauma always be a good thing? I mean, is there ways to keep, as an instructor, keep people safe as you navigate into that? I mean, what are some of the guardrails that you put up, or would you suggest people who might be doing this on their own?
First guardrail is timed writing. no exercise that we do in the writing group is any longer than 20 minutes, and many are 10 and 15 minutes. When you're writing alone, if you can create the discipline to set the timer, say, I will stop after this, and not keep going and end up taking yourself down the rabbit hole, which is what happens when you keep going and keep perseveration. And that's not helpful. That makes it worse. So I use strict time limits. And then I introduce a process of go back and read what you've written and underline a word, a phrase, something that stands out. There might be 3 or 4 things in your writing that seem to be more emotionally potent than others. Underline those. Now, next day you sit down with your book, set the timer, 10 minutes, take one of those lines and expand on it. And so that's what I often suggest for writing at home. Writing at home, it's much harder to keep the boundaries, because when we've been traumatized or we're suffering, we tend to just keep going and going. That is not healthy. It doesn't have health benefits. You end up perseverating and going around and around. But timed writing is very important. And reflection is very important. I don't just let the writing stand like, oh, great story, but I'll ask the group, what stays with you? What did you hear? What stands out for you? And they'll say, oh, I loved it when she said blah, blah, blah. I was so touched when blah, blah, blah. But I don't let the people giving feedback go on and say, I was so touched. And I remember when it's always focused on the person who is doing the reading and writing and sharing their story. But timed writing is a big part of it. And you can always go back. Do forms come out? Yes, people will write poetry. People may write memoir later, but I'm not in memoir class. But they have the material.
Right.
And I got a book 2 years ago from one of the cancer patients who'd written in my groups for about 7 years. And then we had come back to Toronto. And in that time, she died. But before she died, she took all of her writing that she had done and the poetry that we had used, and it became part of her memoir, which was really a lot of different memories. It wasn't a memoir form, but coupled with the poems and the reflections and all of that, had it bound. And that was her gift to her family. And so legacy becomes part of it as well.
Yeah, what a legacy to leave.
Yeah, it was.
Do you think the value is, the real value is not just the writing, but the community? I mean, I'd have to imagine you can get some benefits from doing this alone, but to be validated, to be heard, to share your story, to have it said out loud, to have recognized you've lived through it, that perhaps you can live through the next episode, to hear other people with similar experiences. They go, oh, I'm not alone. I felt that too.
Right. And also to say, like in my case, my God, I'm very lucky. I mean, I have heart failure. Yeah. But how many years ago was that I was diagnosed? I'm still going, you know? So there's gratitude as well, but that leveling. And I think the other thing is that they also see and hear from people in the group who have much more serious conditions in some cases than they do, and are coping and finding, beauty and things to write about in that experience. There are tears in the group, invariably, but it's people really began to hold each other up, if you like, and that's all through shared story and shared experience. And I don't let people say, for example, when somebody finishes writing, oh my gosh, the day you were diagnosed, well, I remember when I was, and it was.
Yeah.
We don't go there. We stay focused on the person who has just shared their reading aloud.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it.
I could imagine there could be a tendency to top somebody. Like,
There,
well,
there's
you had that. Well, listen to my.
yes. It reminds me of a children's story somewhere, you have one, I have two.
Yeah, exactly. I did read, interestingly enough, in a story that the reason our species has become so dominant is that we tell stories. It's what we do.
I think stories are the heartbeat of humanity. And one of the things, and this is just, well, certainly when I lead groups online, which I did profusely during COVID, and I still do to a certain extent, but the impact on me and on the people is reduced by 50% at least. And we lose our capacity, I think, to be quiet, to reflect, to tell our stories in a world that is increasingly fast and technological. And how many people are being left behind by that?
Yeah.
Story was the heart of community. And online stories, not quite the same experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's also something when we verbally share, like we're
Yes.
we can see the expressions.
Yes.
You can, I mean, so much is told just by
Absolutely.
body language.
Absolutely.
Sharon, you've been doing this a long time and doing it very well. And I have benefited, and I think you're wonderful at what you do. After all these years of running expressive writing workshops, what is the takeaway for you? Like what have you learned? What stands out? What has it given you, and what do you think it's given people?
Well, I've always loved writing myself, and I don't write, and I don't share what I write in the group because I'm the leader. That would be an ego trip, and I've been in groups where the leader also shares, and it just kind of alters what can happen in the group. But and I was always a creative, expressive, drama, music, the whole shebang. But I grew up in a family of storytellers, and that's how I learned family history, was around the Thanksgiving table with 9 aunts and uncles, and laughter and stories. And it was such a strong sense of life and community and all of those things. And I fell into it, for lack of a better thing. I tried very hard to be a good academic, but what I loved best was teaching, always. And I was lucky in my doctoral work to end up doing a wonderful study that was done in a school of landscape architecture with some wild and crazy guys, but their creativity, and it forced me to come at the research differently. I'm wandering here, but I've always loved story. I've always loved poetry. I've always loved how the human experience is told in those ways.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's a good answer.
What would you suggest for people to get started? I mean, we talked about those exercises you can do on your own.
Yep.
Like what would some next steps and takeaways be for some people, just to wrap it up?
Well, I think that always, if there's an expressive writing group going on, it's a good thing in the health community. But there's a lot of things going on in the health community that don't foster that time. Or you end up doing online and it just doesn't have the same impact. Mm. But if people want to write, writing is such a powerful therapeutic adjunct, But again, the rules are: get a journal, a nice one. You're writing your life. Get a nice one. I have a leather-covered journal cover that I put inserts in that I've had for decades. Take the time. Give yourself the time, and it doesn't have to be any more than 30 minutes a day, or every other day, 3 or 4 times a week, and sit down and write. Write about what? Well, there's a bazillion prompts available in almost any writing book you would buy, but more importantly, what comes up during your day? Did you overreact to something? Start there. Start about how you reacted in response to something. Start there and see where it takes you, but set the clock. Don't write any longer than 10 or 15 minutes, and stop when it goes off. Stop. Read it over, underline those phrases that pop. Next day, take one of those and start again. Write 3 or 4 times a week if you can. Once a week, just write. I mean, getting your story on paper. And what invariably happens is you'll segue into other things. It might be the prompt that you need to get going on writing your life story.
Yeah.
You might end up writing poetry, then maybe you'll send a poem out. Maybe you'll have the courage to do that. Or you just might share your story with your family, or you might not. But it's a wonderful way of self-reflection. It's quiet in a noisy world.
Yeah.
And it puts us back in touch with ourselves and humanity. So those are big, big things. But I think it does all that.
Yeah. Important things in this busy, crazy world, making sense of what has happened, and also making sense of how we feel, and then getting to know ourselves better.
Exactly. And it does all of that.
And that can only build resilience and hope in yourself and in your future, and which is all that we can ask for, really, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Sharon, I really appreciate the time you spent with us today. I think there's lots of great information that people can take away to help them make sense of their diagnosis, their ongoing condition, maybe the loss of a child or a family member. I mean, lots of issues that people in our community are dealing with. I strongly recommend, if anyone sees an expressive writing course that's offered in person, affiliated with their hospital or cardiologist, to take it. I know that here in Toronto, you've offered the course, and I would suggest people to do it at home, but also see if they can find a spot to do it. It's really helpful. So,
The segue, the online, has been a disadvantage in the last couple of years. I will say that. There just isn't the same sense of community that develops on a computer screen. But it's better than nothing.
Yes, Well, thank you, Sharon. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate asking to be part of this.